Good morning, everyone. I'm Miriam Allen, Treasurer for the Chicago West Side Chamber of Commerce. I'm sitting in for Tina Augustus, our CEO. Today is Wednesday, September 14th, 2022, and we are here with Mr. Anthony Travis, also known as the Tax Doctor, who will share with us today some important information about the Illinois Amendment 1 and how it affects all taxpayers in Illinois. In order to make the best use of our time together, I want to do a little housekeeping and share a few Austin community events. I'm asking everyone, please stay muted. If you have questions, you can drop them in the chat and they will be acknowledged. And with this request in place, no one will be allowed to openly ask questions. We will only acknowledge the questions in the chat. Thank you very much, and let's get started. I want to share a little background information about the Tax Doctor. Mr. Anthony Travis is a retired veteran from the United States Army. So thank you, sir, for your service.
Appreciate you.
He is currently the school board trustee of the Proviso Township. In this capacity, he is solely responsible for the hire of the township treasurer and for designating the depository banks for school funds. He also provides oversight for the allocation of a $300 million budget. He served 2 consecutive terms on the Village Board of Trustees in Maywood. He is executive director of Daddy's Club, a nonprofit organization he founded to address absentee fatherism. This organization instills a sense of pride in community and encourages a healthy family dynamic through a popular public access TV show. His responsibilities include fundraising, budget management, community organizing, and program development. Anthony Travis has over 25 years in warehouse management at Comcast. Mr. Travis holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Chicago State University. I want to share a few key statistics that Mr. Travis has provided, and he will elaborate on them. Concerning union versus non-union, 14% are union workers, 12% government workers, 8.7% private sector. And so between the two, 20% are unionized, 80% are non-union workers. Concerning our school districts, Illinois has 856 school districts, and we want 50 school districts. There are 1,877,000 students. Florida has 74 school districts, 2,700,000 students. Florida has 67 counties, 20 million people. Illinois has 102 counties and 12 million people. Thank you, Tax Doctor. The floor is now yours.
Well, thank you for that fantastic introduction. I want to thank the West Side Chambers, also the West Side Ministers Coalition, because without the chamber, without the West Side Ministers Coalition, there would be no Tax Doctor. The West Side Ministers Coalition have given me a platform for 3 years talking about property taxes. And now that I met Tina, she has also opened her doors to the Tax Doctor. We also are joined by a person named Ted Dabrowski with WirePoint, and he's going to give a presentation. When you share the Zoom with him, he's going to give us a slide presentation and some more information that we all need to know. Let's go ahead and do this. Let me bring Ted up first and let Ted give us this powerful information that all of us need to. And folks, I know it's being recorded, but you should be taking notes. because you're going to be the drum majors as this thing proceed towards the November the election. So I want to turn it over to Ted. Unmute yourself, Ted.
There you go. Travis, thank you so much. And thank you all for allowing me to join here and talk a little bit about Amendment 1. At Wire Points, we're a not-for-profit. We're very focused on turning around Illinois. We want more people to stay in Illinois, move to Illinois. And we're very concerned about the flight of people, the flight of businesses. And it will be very hard to maintain a strong, vibrant, powerful Illinois if we can't keep our people here. One of the big issues coming before everybody's Amendment 1. Very few people know about it. It was a bipartisan vote in both the Senate, a little less so in the House. But now voters in Illinois will decide whether to approve Amendment 1. It's called Workers' Rights, but I would argue that that's not the proper name. But why don't I just take you through? I'm going to take you through 4 slides. I think it is, if I can. Let me just see if I can share here. So I want to take you through a few slides of things we should take into account before we think about how to think about Amendment 1. And one of those is Illinois already pay the nation's highest property taxes. So this graphic is showing all 50 states, and it's showing the percentage of home value that we pay in on average across the state. Percentage of property taxes we pay as a percentage of home value, almost 2%. We're the highest in the country already. And this is what's been driving a lot of areas, a lot of people, let's say crazy. A lot of people have left because of this. And you can see that we are far, far higher than some of our neighbors. Down here is Indiana at 0.8%. So they're less than half what we are. Kentucky's down here at like 0.7%, much lower. So this is a big problem. The second thing is we have the nation's biggest pension debts. We have a constitutional clause right now that says pensions cannot be diminished. They can't be reformed. They can't be changed, even if we're talking about benefits that have not been earned yet. Well, we have the biggest burden in the country, bigger than bigger states like California and Texas. We're going to be paying even more property taxes because of these debts. So something to take into account when we think about Amendment 1. The other thing that's been hurting everybody, it's really hurt Southland, is home values. We have the nation's 3rd worst performance in home values when you adjust for inflation in the country. Other people have seen their nest eggs grow, right? That's what a lot of people have, their savings and their home values. We have not seen any growth in Illinois. There's only 2 states worse than us. And this is over the last 20 years. This is coming straight from the Census Bureau data. So you go to US Census Bureau, this is their stuff. So people's home values haven't done well. And as everybody knows, we've lost the 3rd most people in the country. When you look at people moving in from other states, and you take into account people moving out of Illinois to other states, on a net over the last 20 years, we have lost a net 1.4 million people. Think about what that means in terms of lost tax revenues, lost entrepreneurship, lost philanthropy. Anyway, we're the 3rd worst in the country. People are leaving. And I know that Southland has been a big part of that in the losses there, South Cook. And 2 ways to measure our problems. This is the credit score, or let's call it the credit score. This is the credit ratings of the 50 states. Moody's does this. And you have Indiana, Iowa, and Missouri. They're the most pristine, the best credit scores of AAA, best credit. Down here at the bottom is Illinois, the worst credit score in the country. And we were almost junk rated, just like Chicago already is. But we were saved by the COVID federal bailout. So we're not close to junk rated in Illinois now, but we have the worst credit score. So I say all that. Let's quickly then go into what the amendment is. As a 501c3, you won't hear me advocating for or against this amendment, but I'll tell you what it does. The first part, these are the words. I broke it into 3 sections. These are the words of the amendment. Okay, this is part 1. Employees shall have the right to the fundamental right to organize and to bargain collectively for things like wages, hours, working conditions, and something new, to protect their economic welfare and safety. Now, I'll tell you in a second, this really only applies to the public sector. So we're talking about the public sector unions, the teachers unions, the state unions, police, fire. But what this thing does, this section does, it cements the union powers right into the Constitution. Forget all the laws we have, forget legislation, forget the lawmakers for making laws about labor. It's going to be in the Constitution, just like this. The second part it does is it adds this thing, says, no law shall be passed that interferes, negates, or diminishes the rights of these employees. So they're going to make a right in the Constitution, just like free speech. They're going to make this a right. And what this means is that no law, legislature won't be able to pass a law to change labor laws. They won't be able to pass something to maybe lower property taxes, which is great if you're a union member, because it'll be really hard to lower any benefits. And it'll give the unions much more power to negotiate. But if you're a taxpayer, you may not like this, because how will they ever pass any laws? The last part is it blocks right to work for the private sector. So you've seen many states go right to work, and that's attracted lots of investment, big factories and plants. Indiana's gone right to work, Wisconsin's right to work, Kentucky's right to work, Iowa's right to work. Only Missouri is the only neighbor that is not right to work. Well, this will block Illinois from ever becoming right to work. What's important, a couple more slides here. What's important is this amendment does not cover the rights of private sector workers. There's ads out there saying that this covers private sector workers. Those ads are not true. The federal labor laws cover the rights of private sector workers, and federal labor laws supersede anything that we would have in Illinois. So when you see those ads on TV about the nurse, if you've seen that one, the nurse saying he's protected, he can't get fired for speaking up and things like that, that ad is not true. And even the sponsor of this amendment, Senator Allen, he said, as federal labor law stands today, the amendment could not apply to the private sector. So it's not me saying it, the sponsor said that. That's a very important point. So this law is really all about public sector unions and more power. So let me just summarize here's what a supporter might say about this amendment. This creates the nation's strongest government unions, giving more power to fight for bigger compensation, more social justice programs, and they'll have more power to push for tax revenues to go up. So public sector unions supporters would probably say something like that. It vastly expands the powers of, for example, teachers' unions when they negotiate. So, for example, they might be able to put more diversity, equity, and inclusion, or sex ed curriculum in the contracts, and parents and other groups wouldn't be able to interfere. So that way, if they think they can do the education best, that's the power for them. The supporters may like that it says that the bargaining rights can't be diminished, much like pensions. And the last thing is, of course, this blocks Illinois from becoming right to work. So if you're against right to work, then this is a amendment for you. Finally, on the opponent's side, what they might say is no other state, with Amendment 1, no other state will give such extreme union powers to their unions. No other state would have protections like the ones that Amendment 1 provides. And that would give them benefits that only the public sector gets. The private sector workers don't get those kind of benefits, but they're forced to pay for the public sector no matter what. I mentioned we already pay the highest taxes in the country. So with these powers, you can only imagine property taxes going up faster than they did before, pushing more people out of the state. And finally, an opponent might say that these powers for the unions, it will erode parents' rights in the schools. We saw the powers of the Chicago Teachers Union striking several times. They'll have even more powers with this. So those are the pros and cons, and people have to figure out what they support. And that's all I have for now, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ted. In understanding what you just saw, the main 2 points that I want folks to walk away with is that I don't quite comprehend what economic welfare means. I noticed that when the teachers went out on strike, they have that language in their contract. And then they can ask taxpayers to pay their rent, pay their mortgages, all kind of stuff that, as you would say, pie in the sky. And we have to understand the second part of this is the fact that Ted mentioned no laws could be changed, no ordinances. When we think about the state, we're talking about income taxes going up to pay for the state workers. But when we talk about municipalities, townships, county government, special districts, all of these units of government get their money by property taxes. So if the union bosses can negotiate a contract for higher wages, knowing that these municipalities don't have the money to pay for this stuff, these municipalities can get locked in to a devastating economic contract. And if this thing is cemented into the Constitution, it would be on the same level as the pension crisis. Article 13, Section 5, folks. Article 13, Section 5. You cannot diminish or impair these folks' benefits. Why is this so important? Because if you need to make a change, and we do need to make a change when it comes to our pensions in this state, you can't do it. So if we lock the WRA 1 amendment into the Constitution, we would be in the same boat we're in with the pension situation. So you say, tax doctor, why is this so important? The reason it is so important is because you as a taxpayer lose your rights. You as a union person inside the union, you lose your rights. Because again, if a personnel issue pop up or a labor policy pop up that needs to be fixed, folks, it can get fixed because it's enshrined into the Constitution. They had the same problem out there in Hawaii. Same languages in their Constitution. And a situation popped up dealing with labor policy, and it couldn't get fixed for the simple reason it's enshrined into the Constitution. Let me make something perfectly clear. I come from a family of union people. My father was in the union, my mother was in the union, my brother was in the union, and I was in the union. My mother was a union steward. My brother was a union steward. I was a union steward. But the position we take as union people is that union labor policy should be in the law. It should be in the law and not the Constitution. Because if you enshrine it in the Constitution, you can't change it unless you have another constitutional amendment. And we see with the pension crisis. And let me say this, folks, because when Governor Pat Quinn was governor, they had SB 1 and they had House Bill 1, where they tried to amend the pension crisis. They tried to fix it from their perspective. And at that time, I was working for a guy by the name of James Stewart, who was a union representative from CTU. And they were fighting pension reform because they didn't want nobody messing with their money. And I'm young on the scene, not knowing what I know today. and I'm going gun ho for, CTU. But as I got older and began to understand the significance of what happened in 1970, when they had the Constitutional Convention, the amendment of Article 13, Section 5 came by way of a special election in December of 1970 that gave us the pension policy. 53 years later, when the state tried to fix the pension crisis, they couldn't do it because Mr. Stewart, CTU, retirees, and union members took the state to court. Supreme Court ruled that you cannot diminish or impair their benefits. But this is the caveat. Now, our legislators won't tell us this part. They'll tell us, oh, the big bad wolf was the Supreme Court because they wouldn't let us make no changes. But the Supreme Court told them, if you want to fix the pension crisis, you must have a constitutional amendment. That's how we got to this point. And so here we are with Amendment 1. Amendment 1 would take away your rights, my rights. And as a taxpayer, I will watch my property taxes go up because the union bosses can now negotiate with these municipalities and special districts, water reclamation districts, and the county, on and on. And they can end up getting fat pay raises that us taxpayers cannot afford to keep paying anymore in this state. And so when you couple the pension crisis with Amendment 1, it hurts the business community and it hurts the taxpayers. And we're concerned about the taxpayers, but we're also concerned about the business climate. If we don't get more businesses to locate in this state, create jobs, lower the tax burdens of the homeowners, we're going out the door backwards. And maybe Ted, maybe you can expound a little bit more on this thing called economic welfare. That's the new language under Article 1, Section 25. What the hell do economic welfare mean?
Yeah, so we saw that in the amendment, right? So now not only do they have the right to negotiate over hours and wages and things like that, but economic welfare. And when you think about this constitutional amendment, it will replace all the laws that are out there. So we won't be able to go back and look for a law. They just say economic welfare. It's so broad that how would we change anything? For example, if you wanted to merge two school districts and it meant some people lost their jobs, well, somebody will say, hey, you're hurting my economic welfare. And you can try to battle it, might go to courts, they'll point to the Constitution, no change. You've got some communities, and I know the South Cook communities very well. Their property tax rates are some of the highest by far in the country. You're talking about rates of 10% on a home, 12% on a home. They've gone crazy. If you wanted to do some kind of labor reforms to bring in costs with what the people in the community can afford, it won't happen because you'll be hurting somebody's economic welfare. Let's go further than that because it also says safety. Tax doctor says safety. So what about this union? Maybe they say, hey, we don't feel safe in our schools if we're not doing some more of this, sex ed classes in the classroom. Not all parents want that kind of thing. Bring it down to the younger levels. Well, if they put that in the contract because they want everybody to be safer, parents aren't going to be able to fight that back. And so it's so broad, this economic welfare, this safety, that that's why I say it can only mean fewer parents' rights and higher taxes because it's going to be hard to go the other way just by the constitutional protections. So, and I should remind people that in Illinois, there's two things. We already have in Illinois some of the strongest public sector union powers in the country already. So when you add these rights, they will make them the strongest. And we're just one of 10 states, just 10 states that do the negotiations of the unions and the administrators in closed doors where taxpayers can't watch what happens. So just recently, one of the school districts just nearby here announced that they had concluded their negotiation with the unions. And the newspaper article said the details of the agreement will not be released until after it's signed. So that means the public doesn't get to find out today. The public in Illinois doesn't get to find out what's being negotiated until after it's too late. What did they give away? What did the administrators give away? What did the unions, what were they able to get? We're just one of 10 states where that happens. So now imagine even more powers done in the darkness of negotiation. You know, we're one of just 13 states that allow strikes. We legalize strikes for our teachers. Indiana doesn't do that. Wisconsin, Kentucky, Iowa, Missouri, none of them allow teacher strikes. So we have a lot of public sector union powers. And, you know, it's hard to think how this state will function with pensions and even more powers, especially under the undefined economic welfare, undefined safety. The legislature can no longer legislate these things. What kind of state does that become? I'm not even sure.
Let me ask you this, Ted. How did we get to this point where Amendment 1 got in the General Assembly, but I cannot recall any of our state representatives from the House to the Senate coming back to the community telling us about Amendment 1 and why they should vote to put this on the ballot? Did your rep call you up and tell you about Amendment 1? How did you find out about
it? Nobody knew about it. This is, you know, one of those things where the unions, you know, quietly negotiated with the legislators. You know, I don't know where this group stands, but we're very cautious about the corruption that exists in Illinois. We're very cautious about the relationship between the powerful public sector unions and the government, and the way they take care of each other. They give campaign contributions to each other. They give the right votes. We've seen this happen over and over again. And this is one of those examples. As I mentioned, no other state in the country would do or has done what we would do. No state has given any kind of powers like these and rights in the Constitution when you look at the combined package. You know, tax doctor, I can't tell you other than it's just par for the course for where Illinois has been going, where the little guy, the ordinary person, has very few powers. Look, ordinary private citizens, like most of the people on this call, me, I don't get any multi-year labor contract. I don't have any guaranteed pension. I don't have such rights in the Constitution. So all of us would have none of those rights, but we'd have to pay for all the costs of the public sector workers who would have such rights in the Constitution. And that just isn't, it's not democracy. It's not fair. This is not how you don't legislate by putting things like that in the Constitution. The Constitution is special. It should be, you know, left for a few things that matter, like freedom of speech, for example.
Now, you talk about corruption. A delegate of the members of the governor's task force, we had an opportunity to go out to Villa Park, and we had a meeting with Senator Tom Cullerton. And we was informed before we went out there to be careful talking to him because he was up under indictment. And to my dismay, I said, what's going on? Well, we found out he was one of the ones who pushed for the constitutional amendment, but he also received a $200,000 ghost paycheck. And that's part of something, that's just an example of the corruption we're talking about. Here he had a union job. He got paid $200,000 and he did not work one day on that job. The union bosses signed him in, signed him out, He did end up pleading guilty. He had to step down. Now, the other kicker to that, he stepped down. So that means his pension stays intact. So if he go to jail, would he lose his pension? Do you know, Ted?
No, I don't know. I mean, it all depends. You know, some of them have managed to keep their pensions despite all the corruption we've seen in Illinois. I know some of them have lost them, but I don't know the details there.
I think it's until they're convicted. They,
Okay.
while they're awaiting trial, they continue to collect.
So
Same thing with Madigan.
But if they step down and retire, does that make a difference that they retire and start collecting their pensions?
No, as long as they're not convicted of a crime.
Okay.
I believe that's how it works.
I think that's right. Mhm.
Now, Amendment 1. Amendment 1, as a taxpayer, my question would be, how could the legislators sit down in Springfield and vote for something that would take away their right to fix labor policy? Why would they do that? Now, we do know the information that was put out by the Illinois Policy Institute that $15 million was dropped into the bucket to spread around to these candidates. So we're beginning to understand that they sold us out for 30 pieces of silver, because that's what it equates to when you look at the big scheme of things. So if Amendment 1 passed in November, we as taxpayers, we as citizens have no more rights. And for the life of me, I cannot fathom us continue to watch our state go down the tube like the Titanic, and we don't do nothing about it. In 1970, when they had the vote on the ballot, 37% of the population came out and voted. 37%. You equate that with what happened in the primary. Less than 20%, and less than 20% in some of the various precincts, people did not come out and vote. So the one good thing that I'm witnessing is that in 1969, I was just coming out of 8th grade. And in 1971, we moved to Maywood. I did not hear my mother. And I say my mother because my mother was the person in the house who kept up with all the Karen news and everything. I didn't hear my mother talk nothing about the constitutional amendment that was on the ballot in 1970 in December. And here today, we have a golden opportunity to right a wrong that happened in 1970, because we're now making more people aware of the constitutional amendment that's on the ballot. And Article 1, Section 25. Section 25, that is the new language. And if we sit back and let this thing get through, folks, business people throughout the country will not want to locate their businesses in Illinois. And as I say to most people, we have to become business friendly and taxpayers friendly. Because when you look at the public sector, it's the taxpayers who pay the bills for the public sector. And you have to understand that the private sector, which is 80%, also help pay the bills for the public sector people. And we cannot continue to let 20% control the 80%. So we say to everybody, you got to get informed. You got to listen to what is being said. And you got to read that fine print in section 25, because that's the most dangerous section to us. I was on a Zoom last night with the Poor People Campaign, and they have about 9,000 members statewide. And this is an issue that we're going to be discussing at the Poor People Campaign. Now, some of the members at the Poor People Campaign support the amendment because they think workers should have rights. I'm not saying they shouldn't have rights. I'm saying it shouldn't be in the Constitution.
Hey, Travis, let me just hop in right there.
Yes.
The workers already have all those rights in the current law.
Yes.
Right. So as I mentioned, Illinois public sector workers already have some of the most powerful laws in the country in their favor.
Yes.
So if somebody votes against the amendment, they're not taking away anything.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's a very important point from the public sector unions. They're just saying, let's not put it in the Constitution. So that's just an important point, that a vote no doesn't mean you're taking away something from the unions. They still retain every one of their
Yes.
powers and rights that I've mentioned. You know, the right to strike, the right to hold their negotiations in secret, all those things they keep. That's an important point. Just one more thing. I in the chat, I put in the link to our WirePoints page. We put together the language and explanation, who voted for it, who voted against it, some arguments for, against. So you can find those things there on our WirePoints Amendment 1. Sorry, Travis.
That's no problem. And I want us to understand, we have 7,000 units of government in our state, 7,000. More units of government than any other state in the United States of America. We have now 12 million population. We done lost over 1 million people to outright migration. And as Ted pointed out, that 1 million loss result into billions of dollars in lost revenues to our state. And when you think about the big fish, Ken Griffin, taking his $22 billion out of our state. Folks, that's just one little midget on this iceberg. $22 billion is a lot of money. Now come along again, we keep talking about Amendment 1, Section 25, economic welfare. Folks, you have to ask yourself this question. What does economic welfare mean to the bottom line? It means your taxes going up. That's what that means. Especially if the union bosses can negotiate the kitchen store, the house, the sink, as we like to say. Who's going to pay for this stuff? The taxpayers. And that's why it's so important for us to understand that the legislators, our legislators, did this to us. They put Amendment 1 on the ballot. And we're taking a position, you should have put Article 13, Section 5 on the ballot to amend the Constitution so we can fix the pension crisis. Folks, New Jersey and Illinois is running neck and neck when it comes to property taxes. 1 and 2, we're 1 and 2, we're 1 and 2. Highest property taxes in the country. Illinois workers and some of the retirees that I know. They take the position and they have told me, Travis, something's got to be done. We can't sustain this system. So if some of the retirees understand we can't sustain this system, why would your representative? And that's what everybody needs to do. You need to call your state rep. You need to call your state senator and put them in the hot seat. Why did y'all do this to us? Now we got to spend our time educating the populace on why Amendment 1 is so dangerous. And we got to keep repeating this story. Ted has gone out west. Ted went south. I done went south. I've been on TV, in the newspapers, beating these drums. I've been on radio, beating these drums. Folks, Amendment 1 must be defeated. And to the workers of this state, you don't lose none of your rights. You don't lose none of your rights. And that's the key point. Is there any questions from anyone out there?
Mr. Travis, I'd like to get
Anthony.
Yes.
Someone else.
Go ahead.
Phyllis Logan, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. Can I hear from Anna Marie on the Illinois policy? I got in late. I apologize. I heard
No problem.
that Ted had to state, but can Anna Marie speak on what the Illinois policy team is doing or saying?
Go ahead, Ann.
Howdy, and I am sorry, guys, I had a meeting run late, and so I'm not in the office as I wanted to be to join you for this meeting, but thank you so much for the floor. I'm actually also curious how other people are feeling, how the guests here feel on Amendment 1. Same with Ted. We're also 501c3, so we cannot have a formal position for or against, but we are doing similar kind of research to what Ted has said about we know at Illinois Policy, we care about taxpayers, we care about the health of the state, and this amendment will have a lot of unintended consequences for taxpayers, as Anthony and Ted have both laid out. I'm curious if there's anything, are there any issues in particular that you want to hear about or that are important to you when you're hearing these arguments? I really like the way that Ted laid it out, giving a for and against. That's the same thing I kind of do. You know, my brother's in the union, and so I'll say, hey, here's our research on it. Here's what the unions are saying, and make your decision. You know, we really are a platform of information. So I'm glad to answer any questions that you might have. But I'm with Anthony and Ted on the side of how this will be harmful to taxpayers, not great for union members, and not really great for the future of the state. But I'm curious, are there anything that you're stuck on, or you're hung up on, or that you'd like to dig into further?
I really just wanted to hear Illinois Policy's perspective. So no specific question. Like I said, Ted explained a lot. I've read his works and his writings. His
Gotcha.
organization's
Yeah, and so
writings.
yeah. Oh, you're fine. So yeah, I did share our study guide in there. Same thing. So our research has shown, basically, as Ted has pointed out, we have really high property taxes. We're the state with the highest property taxes. Our researchers have found that if the rate of property taxes continue to grow at how they are growing for the average household, we're looking at the best, if this thing passes, $2,100 increase per family. And that's at the best, and that's not including all of the things that, unions or anybody would be able to add. This will be costly for business, as either their employees try to unionize, although it says private sector, this can apply to private sector unions. The confusion will have to be figured out in the courts, which is going to be costly for businesses, as workers may try to unionize, and then they have to, fight in the legal system again, with their workers, or bargain. And so and then obviously the impact that it would have to parents for private sector or public sector, teachers unions, other kind of, any other kind of public sector state worker that could potentially unionize and go on strike or just want to push and expand these powers, there's a lot of there's just a lot of potential for kind of more conflict, and that'll be costly and a headache for just normal taxpayers, for parents, for business owners. And as you know, bringing it back to the tax doctor, you know, property taxes matter not just for property owners, but for renters too. All of that stuff gets passed down to renters. And so, you know, people might say, well, I'm not a homeowner, I'm a renter. But if my landlord's property taxes go up because of, you know, all the, in addition of benefits or just the faster rate of things that we're going to have to pay for, well, I'm going to feel that, you know. And so there's virtually no part of the economy or state that this will not touch. And so it's important that people know about it and are educated to make their decisions.
This morning I was watching MSNBC, and they were talking about inflation. And right now they're saying that's what driving inflation is rental property, rent going up, and home ownership. That's what's driving inflation. Gasoline prices is coming down. The supply chain is getting better. But inflation is staying stable because the uncertainty of how high can rent go in our country. And I know the NBOA, that's another organization that deals with people who own rental property. It's sort of like we're at a crossroad now, because we got people that we have sent to Springfield who are not looking out for our best interests. And that's something we're going to have to deal with. I know, because you, Ted, and even with my organization, the Daddy's Club, we're 501c3. We can put out educational information, but when it comes to making a decision, we have to step back from our organizations and say, as an individual, I have to tell you to vote no. But from an organizational perspective, I can't tell you what to do. I can just lay out the facts. And that's what you and Ted has done. But
can I add something? Just
yes.
I think is a general explanation. And I tried to say it earlier, but I think Illinois has taken, and let's forget Amendment 1 for a second. I think if you look at all the laws, we've effectively created two classes of people. And I'm not trying to talk negatively about individual public sector workers, because, I love, we need public safety. We need good government services. So I'm not against all that. But if you look at the system we've created in Illinois, we're talking about a corrupt system that's created all of these problems that it has. So if you look at the power of the public sector unions combined with the power of the government, we've created two classes of workers in Illinois. And one has guaranteed pensions, has long-term contracts, guaranteed raises, pension spikes, this accumulation of sick leave. I can go on with the list and the list, and those are all protected in law. So we've created one class that gets all that. And there's another class, the second class, which is forced to pay for the first. But that second class doesn't have any of those protections. It doesn't have anything like that. And, yes, there's some rich people who can pay for anything, right? You got your people up, where I live in the Winnetka, Wilmette area. Okay, but you're making all the private sector people, many of whom are just struggling to get by in Illinois, you're making them pay for that first class who gets all those guaranteed benefits. And so it's already extreme in Illinois. It's already extreme. And that's why we've talked about these property taxes and out-migration. So the question I think voters have to make is, if they like that and want to make it more extreme, then this is the amendment for them. Because if they want more of that and for it to be on turbocharged and cemented in the Constitution, then go for it. But if you think that it's already gone too far, then you'd vote no for it. Now, remember, again, voting no doesn't take away anything from the unions and all that. It just keeps the status quo. So I think that's the way to think about this. And, some people will want to give the unions even more power. Others will say, no way, man, we've had enough.
And that is so true. And that's why I find it amazing that as I was studying about what happened in 1970 with the constitutional convention and that amendment, I don't hear nobody talking about well, I take that back. I know one person who said we ought to have a constitutional convention in 2028. That's the next time we can have a constitutional convention. But the legislators have to understand that we would give you guys up until 2027 to fix some of these problems. And if you don't want to fix them, then we need to have a constitutional convention to fix these problems. Because when you think about the Titanic, folks, the Titanic sunk. It sunk. Illinois is the next Titanic. And if we don't get property taxes under control, if we don't bring more businesses into the fray, we are going out the world backwards. And that's why it's so important that the chambers understand that we are all in this bed together now, as they say, the boat. The business community, the residential community, we got to come together. And I want to thank the West Side Chamber for holding this forum. The NAACP is going to put on one. All of us, we got to come together. We got to.
Can I add one
Yeah.
last comment?
Oh, I was also going to add a comment. Yeah.
Oh.
But
So
sure. Okay.
I'll go real quick.
Go for it.
And I haven't said this enough about the chamber. Thank you for having us on, and thank you for engaging in this, no matter what your position is. We haven't talked enough about it, but as we talked about people leaving and all that, and it becoming really expensive to live here, it's really hard to locate a business in a state that's shrinking or not growing versus Florida and Texas that are growing by the millions. So just a comment is, as a chamber, you've got to look, is this a pro-growth policy for people and therefore for businesses or not? Sorry, go ahead, please, Anne-Marie. You're on mute.
Unmute yourself, Ann.
I know I was gonna actually add you reminded me that we do have an article for businesses on how Amendment 1 would impact businesses. Thank you again, as they're saying, for giving us the floor. Okay, cool, I've shared it. I wanted to wrap up, Phyllis, what I was trying to, I guess in summation, there's not really an upside to this and there's a lot of downside. And for businesses, as I mentioned, there are people incorrectly saying that this benefits private workers. Hold on. So it's gonna kind of would be a double whammy. One, business costs will go up as they're arguing over what, workers can and can't do as they try to unionize. There has been a big push for unionization, across the US for private sector, larger corporations. And, if somebody is incorrectly told, hey, I could walk into my, beauty salon tomorrow and say, hey, you know what, I want higher wages or I want to negotiate. Well, that's going to be very costly on that business owner if they have to take them to court, all of them, only to find out that they couldn't really do that on the one hand. And then on the other hand, for, a lot of business owners are, brick and mortar, and they're going to see, again, their property taxes go up. They could see their rents and their leases go up. And so there's a lot of costs that this could add to local businesses, especially brick and mortar businesses. And if it's not hitting them in their business, again, you're going to see this in the property of their home, their rents in their homes. And just as we pay more for services overall, to subsidize, whether it's additional pension, additional salaries, whatever other things that they want us to pay for. So yeah, I think there's virtually nobody that this doesn't affect, and it's important. Thank you again for the time to just let us talk to you guys about it. Are there any questions that you guys have? I'm curious on your thoughts. It's always fun to hear how people kind of digest
Anthony,
this.
I do have one other question.
Go ahead.
Yes, I do have one other. That one commercial that's out there, that with the nurse, we've all heard it.
Yes.
And I've been trying to hear it further to break down what this gentleman is saying when he says that I'm thinking that I don't know who the they is that he's talking about to distinguish between who's pushing him out, because he's in the union, and based on what Ted and Ann just stated, they're not being pushed out.
Right.
Do you have any clue on who's the who or the they that this nurse is talking about? Ted or Ann?
It's purported to be a private sector nurse. And he talks, the one that I've seen is the male, and he talks about being able to speak up against the hospital without, being fired, protecting the people, these hospitals, they care more about profits than they do care about taking care of people. All that, regardless whether that's true or not, all that's covered by federal law. And this amendment has nothing to do with what he said, because that's all federal law. And whether this amendment passes or not would not impact him whatsoever, and would not impact the things that he's talking about. Now, it could have a negative impact in that people will try to use the amendment in the private sector to sue and create all kinds of litigation. But in the end, the courts just say, well, this is covered by federal law. But it could just create a huge, as Anne Marie was saying, a huge litigation mess, because everybody's arguing with everybody, trying to use power over each other, even though federal law on the private sector trumps anything the state does. Anne Marie, you may want to add something.
Yeah,
And it is, I got it. I think it is worth pointing out also that, during the pandemic, and I saw this because I have a friend from high school who is a nurse, and she told me about it. Illinois, when talking about nursing, it is worth noting that Illinois, there's a compact of 30 something states where if you're licensed in one of those states, you can just cross the border and go work in any of those other 30 states. During the pandemic, Illinois legislators had the opportunity to vote into that so that we could let more nurses in to help treat people here. And so our nurses could go help where there was a need. Well, I had a friend who, because we're not in this compact, tried to go to California. And by the time she got there, because of all the licensing hullabaloo, she missed the wave. So, there's no telling how many people didn't get cared for, might have died because of that lack of care because of this regulation. Well, the unions, it was the nursing unions, didn't want that to go through. They killed our opportunity to be into that pact and close the door on letting us have more people come to help, because they didn't want the competition. And these are the same unions that are behind this amendment to extend that power even more. And so I think it goes to show kind of a little bit of what Anthony was talking about, losing their rights. That, a lot of the union members aren't happy with their leadership, or the leadership doesn't necessarily represent the union. So we're not anti-union, as he's saying. My dad was a state worker, my brother's in the unions. It's, about fighting for those workers too, and their wants, and that the leadership is different than not necessarily the same as the people. It's the same thing with the teachers unions. You look at the previous CTU election, there were 3 parties. So there is some divisiveness in there. There are people that are not happy with the way the leaders are running things. And so it's really important to think about it in those 2 classes. And then, as he's saying, it's misleading, the commercial in about the amendment, but then also, again, the union bosses that run these nursing unions aren't necessarily on the side of the nurses that they're purporting to represent or to help, right? So, and we see this with school districts and administrators versus teachers, CTU versus parents, or even CTU within itself. I think it's very important to have those distinctions and a little bit of that background in terms of this commercial as well.
And Mrs. Allen from the chamber.
Yes.
As I said earlier, we just want to commend the West Side Chamber, and I have reached out to the chambers on the South Side, the South suburban community, and down into Peoria. And then there's the overall Chamber of Commerce that I've had contact with. We got to stay attentive to all this stuff, because if we don't have commerce, we have nothing. We have nothing. And that's why it's going to be so important that we all stay together, working together, and get away from this attitude that we don't need businesses in our community, especially when we talk about the Black community.
Yeah.
We need more businesses. more entrepreneurs. And we need to be, again, we got to be taxpayers friendly, and we got to be business oriented friendly.
Okay. So I really want to thank each and every one of you for your participation in this session. And we're going to end with this question from Dr. Binion, Westside Ministers Coalition. He says, can we partner in next steps and moving forward? Can somebody address that?
Yes, we can. I mean, that's why it's important that the chamber partner with us, the Illinois Policy Institute and West Point. We're already in a collaborative, so we got to take it a step further.
Okay, all right. And Mr. Ted Dabrowski has put his cell phone number in the chat. So if you'd like to contact him, there's his information. And I just want to give a special thanks to Mr. Travis and to Mr. Dabrowski, and even to Ann Miller for the information that has been shared concerning Amendment 1. And I pray that we all vote wisely.
Yes.
With this said, thank you all for your participation, and this session will be ending.
Could you,
One
before
second,
you
Miss Allen, one last comment.
how
Yeah, I was gonna
can we
say-
see this again?
So this session is recorded on YouTube and Facebook Live. So you can watch it. Either one of those will be available.
Great.
And also, we also have information on our site to get people out to vote. That's also,
Yes.
aside from Amendment 1, we need people out to vote. We need voter participation.
Exactly.
They signed a law recently about vote by mail, so you can sign up for permanent vote by mail. So if you just sign the form one time, and every time there's an election, you don't even have to keep up. They'll just send you your ballot in the mail, and you'll be like, oh, there's an election. Cool. It's easier than ever to have that voter access, and we want people to have access, because that's really where, we can have these discussions all day long, but it's the ballot box that really matters. And so we want to
Yes.
get people out. We have info on our website to help you get, connected in that mail vote by mail, and then also to find out who your representatives are and how to contact them as well. So thank you again, Westside
Yes.
Chamber.
Once we defeat Amendment 1, our next big project is the pension crisis.
Okay, you heard that, folks. So thank you to all our presenters, and this will end our chamber discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right.